The June 16, 1976 Soweto Uprising was a pivotal moment in the history of South Africa and the struggle against apartheid. This uprising, which began as a student protest against the imposition of Afrikaans as the medium of instruction in schools, quickly escalated into a mass movement demanding an end to racial segregation and injustice. This episode aims to provide a comprehensive analysis of the events leading up to the Soweto Uprising, the unfolding of the protest, the gruesome killing of Hector Pieterson, and the long-term impact of this historic event on apartheid and the political history of South Africa. To understand the significance of the June 1976 Soweto Uprising, it is essential to grasp the historical context of apartheid, a system of institutionalized racial segregation and discrimination enforced by the South African government in South Africa by the National Party in 1948 and remained in place until the early 1990s. The roots of apartheid can be traced back to the colonial era and the policies of white minority rule that were established in South Africa. South Africa was colonized by European powers in the 17th century, primarily by the Dutch and later by the British. The establishment of colonial rule brought with it the subjugation and marginalization of the indigenous African populations. The colonial powers implemented policies that reinforced racial divisions and the idea of white superiority. In 1913, the South African government enacted the Natives Land Act, which effectively reversed most of the land for white ownership. This legislation severely restricted the access of Black Africans to land, leading to forced removals, dispossession, and the concentration of Black populations in designated areas known as reserves or homelands. During the early 20th century, Afrikaner nationalism, a political ideology espoused by the white Afrikaans-speaking population, gained momentum. Afrikaner nationalists sought to protect and promote the interests of Afrikaners who were descendants of the Dutch settlers. They believed in the preservation of Afrikaner culture, language, and economic dominance. The National Party came to power in 1948 under the leadership of Dr. Daniel Malan, and they began implementing apartheid as an official policy. The term apartheid itself means apartness or separateness in Afrikaans, reflecting the essence of the system. Apartheid was a comprehensive system that aimed to enforce racial segregation in all aspects of life and institutionalize white minority rule. The government classified South Africans into different racial groups, primarily as white, black, colored or mixed race, or Indian. This classification determined an individual's legal status and rights, including where they could live, work, and study. The Group Areas Act of 1950 segregated residential areas based on race, forcibly removing non-white populations from designated white areas. This led to the establishment of racially segregated townships and the forced removal of millions of Black Africans from urban areas. Past laws required non-white individuals to carry identification documents, passbooks, that restricted their movements and controlled their access to employment and services. Forced removals were carried out to clear areas designated for white settlement. Under apartheid, public amenities such as parks, beaches, hospitals, and transportation were segregated, with separate facilities for different racial groups. Black Africans were subjected to inferior services and infrastructure. Laws were enacted to prohibit interracial marriages and sexual relationships, further enforcing racial divisions and promoting social and cultural separation. The Bantu Education Act of 1953 established a separate and inferior education system for Black Africans, aimed at preparing them for a life of manual labor and limiting their access to quality education and opportunities. The Bantu Education Act had significant and lasting consequences for Black African students and the broader South African society. The Act entrenched educational inequality, depriving Black African students of access to quality education, advanced subjects, and opportunities for intellectual and personal growth. It limited their prospects for higher education, professional careers, and socio-economic advancement. The inferior education provided under the Act perpetuated socio-economic disparities between different racial groups in South Africa. It reinforced the cycle of poverty, limited job prospects, and hindered social mobility for Black African communities. Despite the oppressive system imposed by the Act, Black African students, parents, and communities resisted and found ways to maintain their educational aspirations. Many established informal schools, organized community-based educational initiatives, and fostered a culture of learning and knowledge sharing. The Act contributed to the development of political consciousness among Black African students and fueled their involvement in anti-apartheid activism. Educational institutions became sites of resistance and spaces for organizing and mobilizing against the apartheid regime. Ultimately, the Bantu Education Act of 1953 reinforced racial segregation and perpetuated educational inequality in South Africa. It aimed to keep alive the ideology and practices of apartheid, limiting the opportunities and prospects of Black African students. The legacy of this act continues to be felt in South Africa, even after its repeal in 1979, as the country grapples with the consequences of the discriminatory education system and strives for a more inclusive and equitable education system for all. Throughout the existence of apartheid, there was significant resistance and opposition from various sectors of South African society. Anti-apartheid organizations, political parties, trade unions, and activists fought against the discriminatory policies. The apartheid regime faced increasing isolation and condemnation on the global stage, leading to economic sanctions and cultural boycotts. Soweto, an urban township near Johannesburg, was a focal point of racial inequality and the government's oppressive policies. The socio-economic conditions and restrictions faced by Soweto residents set the stage for the June 1976 uprising. The emergence of the Black consciousness movement played a significant role in awakening political awareness among Black South Africans. The Black consciousness movement had a profound impact on the youth of Soweto during the period leading up to the June 1976 uprising and beyond. The movement, spearheaded by figures such as Steve Biko, emerged as a powerful force in South Africa, particularly among the Black population, as a response to the oppressive and dehumanizing conditions of apartheid. The Black consciousness movement emphasized the importance of self-awareness and empowerment among Black individuals. It sought to inspire a sense of pride, dignity, and self-worth in the Black community, challenging the racist ideology of apartheid that propagated the notion of Black inferiority. The movement aimed to awaken a collective consciousness and mobilize individuals to take action against oppression. The Black Consciousness movement rejected the notion of white supremacy and the dominance of white culture and institutions. It emphasized the importance of valuing and embracing African heritage, culture, and identity. This rejection of white dominance extended to education, where the movement criticized the Bantu Education Act and called for a more relevant and liberating curriculum that reflected Black experiences and aspirations. The Black Consciousness movement prioritized grassroots organizing and community building. It encouraged individuals to form study groups, cultural organizations, and community initiatives that fostered political consciousness and a sense of unity. Through these platforms, the movement sought to educate and empower individuals to challenge the apartheid regime and work towards social and political change. The Black Consciousness movement had a profound impact on the youth of Soweto, empowering them to reject the dehumanizing conditions of apartheid and assert their own identity and worth. It provided a framework through which young people could develop a sense of pride in their Blackness, challenging the internalized racism and self-doubt that apartheid had instilled. The movement played a crucial role in awakening the political consciousness of the youth in Soweto. It provided a platform for young people to engage in discussions about their experiences, aspirations, and the need for social change. Through study groups, cultural organizations, and community initiatives, they developed a deeper understanding of the oppressive nature of apartheid and became active agents of resistance. The Black Consciousness movement played a significant role in mobilizing the youth of Soweto for the June 1976 uprising. The movement's emphasis on empowerment, political consciousness, and resistance provided a rallying point for the youth to express their frustrations and demand change. The student-led protest against the imposition of Afrikaans as the language of instruction became a catalyst for broader resistance against apartheid. Soweto students, particularly those in high schools, began organizing themselves and demanding better educational opportunities and an end to racial discrimination. In 1974, the apartheid government issued a decree mandating that Afrikaans be the medium of instruction for several subjects in Black schools. This decision was met with resistance and became a crucial catalyst for the Soweto Uprising. Teachers and community leaders also played a vital role in organizing the protest and mobilizing the youth. On the morning of June 16, 1976, thousands of students from various schools gathered to march peacefully to the Orlando Stadium to protest against the compulsory use of Afrikaans as a language of instruction. The march was organized by the South African Students' Movement and other student organizations. As the students marched through the streets, the police responded with force, using tear gas, batons, and firearms to disperse the crowd. The protesters, armed with stones and homemade weapons, fought back against the police. The clashes between the students and the police resulted in widespread violence, injuries, and loss of life. The events of the Soweto Uprising quickly gained international attention and condemnation. Journalists and photographers captured the brutal crackdown on the students, and the images and reports spread around the world. This brought increased scrutiny and pressure on the apartheid government. Following the initial uprising, protests and demonstrations spread to other townships and cities across South Africa. The uprising inspired a wave of resistance against apartheid, with workers, activists, and organizations joining the cause. The anti-apartheid movement gained momentum and united diverse groups in the struggle for freedom and equality. The martyrdom of Hector Pieterson is one of the most iconic and tragic events associated with the June 16, 1976 Soweto Uprising in South Africa. Hector Pieterson, a 12-year-old boy, was fatally shot by the police during the protest, becoming a symbol of the innocent lives lost and the brutality of the apartheid regime. His death had a profound impact on the cause of the uprising and the subsequent anti-apartheid movement, leaving a lasting legacy in the fight for freedom and equality in South Africa. Hector Pieterson was born on August 19, 1963 in Orlando West, Soweto, a township near Johannesburg. He grew up during a time of intense racial discrimination and segregation under the apartheid regime. The implementation of Afrikaans as a language of instruction in schools became a focal point of frustration and resistance among Black African students. On June 16, 1976, Hector Pieterson, like many other students in Soweto, took part in the student-led protest against the compulsory use of Afrikaans in schools. He joined thousands of students who marched through the streets of Soweto to voice their discontent and demand equal education rights. As the protests intensified and clashes erupted between students and the police, chaos and violence engulfed the streets. Hector Pieterson was shot by the police near Orlando West High School. The photograph of his lifeless body being carried by a fellow student, Mbuyisa Makubo, while Pieterson's sister, Antoniette Sitole, ran beside them, became an iconic image that captured the horror and brutality of the apartheid regime. Hector Pieterson's death at such a young age, along with the powerful image captured by photographer Sam Nzima, resonated with people not only in South Africa but around the world. Pieterson became a symbol of the innocent lives lost and the courage of the youth in standing up against apartheid. His martyrdom inspired a sense of outrage and galvanized further resistance against the oppressive regime. Hector Pieterson was not the only student who was killed during the June 16, 1976 Soweto Uprising. Hastings Ndlovu, a 15-year-old student, was also killed, but there was no media coverage of his killing and no journalist was available to take his photo moments after he had been shot. Several students were also killed and injured as well. However, the media played a key and important role in the Soweto Uprising, as the photograph of Hector Pieterson's death was widely published and circulated globally, drawing attention to the human rights abuses in South Africa. It became an emblematic image that humanized the struggle against apartheid and elicited international sympathy and support for the anti-apartheid movement. Hector Pieterson's death at age 12 and the Soweto Uprising are commemorated annually on June 16 as Youth Day in South Africa. The day serves as a reminder of the resilience and bravery of the youth and the ongoing fight for justice and equality. It honors the memory of Hector Pieterson and all those who lost their lives in the struggle against apartheid. The martyrdom of Hector Pieterson during the June 1976 Soweto Uprising left an indelible mark on the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. His tragic death symbolized the lost innocence and brutality of the apartheid regime serving as a catalyst for further resistance and solidarity. Hector Pieterson's memory continues to inspire and remind people of the ongoing struggle for freedom and equality in South Africa. The Soweto Uprising became a springboard for the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. It highlighted the determination and courage of the youth in challenging the oppressive regime. The events of that day galvanized resistance, increased international solidarity, and brought apartheid to the forefront of global attention. In the aftermath of the uprising, the apartheid government faced mounting pressure to revise its education policies. While Afrikaans remained a language of instruction, subsequent reforms allowed for more flexibility and the inclusion of other languages. The uprising had a lasting impact on education policies in South Africa. The Soweto Uprising remains a symbol of the fight against apartheid and the determination of the South African people to achieve freedom and equality. June 16 is now commemorated annually in South Africa as Youth Day, honoring the students who lost their lives and celebrating the role of young people in the country's liberation struggle. The Soweto Uprising of June 16, 1976 was a pivotal moment in the struggle against apartheid in South Africa. It demonstrated the power of collective action, particularly among the youth, and drew global attention to the oppressive policies of the apartheid regime. The events of that day continue to be remembered and celebrated as a significant milestone in South Africa's journey towards democracy and justice. In the late 1980s, a combination of domestic resistance, international pressure, and negotiations between the apartheid government and anti-apartheid leaders, including Nelson Mandela, led to a transition towards a non-racial democracy. In 1990, President F.W. de Klerk lifted the ban on political parties and released Mandela from prison. The apartheid system was dismantled and the first non-racial elections were held in 1994, marking the beginning of a new era in South Africa's history. The legacy of apartheid continues to shape South Africa today as the country grapples with the challenges of socio-economic inequality, racial reconciliation, and addressing the historical injustices of the past.